Hello, everyone, and welcome to our first breakout session, Critical Thinking 2.0 Expert Tips for Strategic Thinking. My name's John Monroe, and I'm the Director of Content at GovLoop. And for this session, I'm also your moderator. Thanks so much for joining me. Even the most innovative people can find themselves feeling mentally drained and stuck in a rut sometimes. But with all the demands on the job, you can't afford to have your brain take unscheduled FTO. So, in this session, our speaker will share advice about how to stay sharp and strategic. But before we get to that, I want to cover a few housekeeping items. So first, we have some great resources available for you to download, including the slide deck you'll be seeing. You'll find those resources in the resources tab along the bottom of the screen. And I'll tell you right now, basically everything is along the bottom of the screen. So if you'd like to use the closed captioning feature, look for the show captions icon, which you'll find at the bottom of the screen. And we hope you don't have any technical difficulties. But if you do, don't sweat it. Just send us a message through that Q&A tab, and my colleague Andrew will help you out. And you can use that same tab to submit questions to our speaker. And look, feel free to drop in those questions at any time during the session. And hey, we also have an open chat available where you can interact with other attendees. And we want to hear from you, so please don't be shy. Also, if you miss anything during the session, if you have to get up and walk away, don't worry. Tomorrow we'll email you a link to the entire event so that you can watch it on demand. All right, next slide. As you know, we are giving out CPE credits for today. You can earn one CPE credit for your participation in this session. And to get that credit, you need to do three things. First, stay and participate for the entire session. That's not going to be a problem. You're not going to want to leave. Two, take all the polls. There's 4 of them, so try to take them all. And then finally, fill out that post-event CPE evaluation. Now, you can find that evaluation form in the resource module on the console or in the resource center of the main environment. And all CPE certificates will be emailed directly to you once we kind of confirm you've met all those requirements. Also, just a quick note about the polls. Those will appear on your screen as a pop-out. Just click the response you want to make, hit submit, you're good to go. All right. With all that housekeeping out of the way, let me introduce you to our speaker, not our next speaker, to our speaker. Joining us is Kristen Lasanti, the founder of Radiant Change. She's an expert in transforming leaders, teams, and organizational culture. So without further ado, Kristen, the floor is yours.
Hello, everyone. It is wonderful to be with you. Thank you, John and GovLoop, for hosting me. And I'm so excited to see we've got 160 participants and counting for this conversation about strategic thinking. So I hope everybody is ready to dig in, have some fun, expand our thinking about how we think, and let's go ahead and get started. I want to just kind of tee this up to say, yes, this is absolutely critical thinking 2.0, but it's also a session that is crafted for our times, right? How do we live with complexity and how do we lead lasting change when everything around us is only becoming more complex and changing at greater speeds? So that is some of the rich content and territory we're going to be exploring today. Let's jump right in with our first poll. Right off the bat, we want to know, how do you typically like to solve a problem? Do you like to take immediate action, right? Kind of swiftly move toward a solution and then adjust as you go? Are you like a break it down thinker? You like to break problems into their component parts? Do you like to seek out expertise, right? And reach out to others to get, collective thinking involved, collective intelligence? Do you look for patterns over time and try to get a sense for how to work with what's going on for you? Are you a reframer? So you're probably doing some combination of all of these, but let's just see what your go-to response is when you are faced with a problem.
Kristen, I'm curious, what's your response?
So I, John, have a knee-jerk reaction that I want to take immediate reaction. That is my go-to. And I'm going to own that because I think that a lot of us can relate to, okay, problem, gotta solve it, right? Gotta fix it. That being said, I now see that tendency really clearly in myself, and I've developed some of these other strategies to help me complement or maybe save myself from taking swift action that's maybe not all that well considered. I
Excellent.
also
All right.
married a person who's really good at some of these other steps, so we're in good balance from that.
All right, let's see what our attendees say.
All
So
right.
share the results.
All right. Yeah, it looks like we've got a tie for first place between breaking it down and seeking expertise. Excellent. Closely followed by looking for patterns. So, you pattern finders, you're going to be really enjoying our conversation today because we're going to be talking about just how to do that. So, I'm looking for you to bring some of your innate wisdom to the conversation and to the chat. And then I've got 14% in solidarity with me. I like to take action swiftly. And 10% looking at how can we reframe this challenge and really make sure that we understand what the problem is. Oh, R. McKeever in the chat is asking if I can repeat a phrase I stated a moment ago. Live with complexity and lead lasting change. That is kind of the context for you are in terms of what we're here to do today. I hope that's helpful. Okay, I want to propose to everybody just to get us started thinking about how we approach problems and how we think strategically. I want to propose that there are different kinds of problems which require different kinds of thinking. So, to give you a selection of the types of problems that we are apt to encounter in our world and in our work, here's a few for you to reflect on. The first type of problem is clear. Clear problems have fairly simple cause and effect, right? The solutions are obvious. Tell me in the chat if our problem is this sink is overflowing, what is the solution? Clear the drain. Yeah, turn off the water. Yes, absolutely. Okay, so we've got clear solutions. We can easily diagnose this situation and move to the obvious solution, right? Now, in our work, as we are dealing with perhaps more complex issues than an overflowing sink, we might find clear problems in the sense of, processing standard benefit applications or following documented procedures, right? Those are clear problems that have documented solutions that are obvious and we can follow a step-by-step thinking. Thank you, Jonathan, for your shout out to be careful about looking for hazards. Be careful about that garbage disposal. Yeah, exactly. Let's take good care of ourselves, even with clear and simple solutions. So, clear problems, only one kind of problem. Second kind of problem, complicated. Complicated problems. Complicated problems are finite. They can be solved, like this puzzle here. Anybody else a fan of puzzles? I love a puzzle. Why do I love a puzzle? I love a puzzle because I can solve a puzzle. And so many of the things that I encounter in my work are not solvable, but a complicated problem is solvable, right? There are cause and effect connections that we can see. It might take us some expertise to see those solutions. It might take us some time to puzzle through it, but solutions are possible. So, for example, if we had to implement a new records management system across multiple agencies, that's a complicated problem, right? But it's one that we can move through in a fairly orderly way if we do what some of us identified as having a great aptitude for, break it down into parts and work our way through it, right? Yeah. And just like Andrea is saying, separate into sections and then go from there, right? I always start with the outside, right? We can take that linear process to solve a complicated problem. Then we get to our third type of problem, which is complex. Complex problems are non-linear in terms of cause and effect. It means we don't actually know exactly what is producing the effects that we're seeing in this problem, right? So there are causes, but they might be nonlinear, meaning it's not A to B. We can't draw a straight line. Typically, complex problems like this coral reef you see here have all kinds of different factors feeding in, right? And it's the relationship between those factors that is actually where the complexity emerges from. So it's not just about this puzzle piece fits to this puzzle piece. It's how is this sea anemone, right, connecting with this clownfish, connecting with the flow of the water and the temperature of the water, right? So in a complex problem, solutions are what we call emergent. They come to us as we puzzle, as we explore the problem, right? So curiosity is actually going to serve us much better in a complex problem than expertise, which serves us well in our complicated problem. Does that make sense to folks? So complex problems, addressing homelessness, which involves housing, involves mental health, involves employment, maybe substance abuse systems all working together, right? These are complex problems that we face in our work and in our world all the time. And finally, the fourth category, chaotic problems. Chaotic problems. This is an emergency situation. Causes are unknown. It's coming out of nowhere. There are no solutions that we can see readily. So for example, responding to a natural disaster or a public health emergency, right? These are chaotic problems. And what we do typically with a chaotic problem is we try to mitigate the damage and then get it back into complex territory, right? Where we can understand it enough to work with it. So these are four types of problems: clear, complicated, complex, and chaotic. And this is where we have our second poll for you. We want to know, in your work, which category do most of your problems today fall under? Are they clear and simple to solve? Are they complicated, requiring your expertise or instruction or just patience in the sense of me and my puzzles? Complex and continually emerging? Are they chaotic, requiring urgent action to escape the chaos or to reestablish some sense of order, bring things back to complex? Where do you feel like yeah, thank you, Wendy, all of the above, absolutely. Where would you say most of your problems are falling? Let's see what we find from the group.
Yeah, so while people are finishing that, we do have one quick question. Someone says, what if your problem is that you made a mistake and apologized for it, and the person you apologized to twisted your apology and you got in trouble for apologizing? Now
Mm,
you're afraid to deal with that person again.
mm. This sounds to me like a complex problem. And typically, honestly, anytime a relationship is involved, whether it's a marriage between two people or a team dynamic, an organizational culture, or an entire society, we're dealing with complex problems because those dynamics between us are nonlinear. You didn't know when you were admitting a mistake that this was going to be the outcome, right? And how could you have? Right. So, what we're going to be talking about today in terms of how we think through complexity is actually right on target for this particular question in this particular case. So, let's hold on to it for now. Okay. We've got a clear winner. Okay, this group knows what's up. You all are absolutely in the right webinar. 56% say, okay, most of the problems that I'm facing are complex and continually emerging, followed closely by 28% in complicated or requiring expertise and instruction. Clear and simple to solve is at 6%, and chaotic is at 10%. And Karen is making a good point in the chat, right? Expertise is needed to get to a complex solution, and curiosity, as we'll see. That's where we're going to spend most of our time today. Okay, beautiful. So I have a quote for you all that I'd like to invite you to consider. It's a quote from Russell Akoff, who is a systems thinking master, really, and professor of management. He said, managers don't actually solve problems. They manage messes. Consider that for a moment. What if your job is not actually to solve these problems, but rather to manage the messes that find their way to your door, to your screen, to your department? So, how do we begin to manage a mess? Well, I would like to translate something here. I mentioned a moment ago that Akoff is a systems thinking uh, researcher and thinker. So I'm gonna offer a slight reframe on this mess piece to be that we are managing and working with systems. We are working with systems. What is a system? A standard definition I'll offer you is that a system is a group of interconnected elements that organizes to achieve a purpose, result, or function. Okay. Now, if you're anything like me, when you hear the word system, you think technology, the internet, computer networks, et cetera. But there are many more systems and different ways we can think about systems that aren't mechanistic at all. So before I give you some examples, let's just gather some of this collective wisdom in the chat. What kinds of systems can you think of off the top of your head? Aaron's bringing in cells and biology. Yeah, absolutely. The human body or bodies in general. Ecosystems, Quentin, thank you. Yeah, like this forest we're looking at here. Philosophical systems, so systems of thought. People systems, relational systems, information systems, family, economics. Oh, absolutely. Government, yeah. Production systems, data systems, ordering materials through processing. Absolutely. How do we know how many materials we're going to need? Supply and demand, kind of bringing us back to economics, as was said a moment ago. Our education system. Yeah, beautiful. Healthcare. And in some of these that you're offering up, we're starting to see systems of systems, right? So, like our respiratory system, each and every single one of us are using our respiratory system right now, right? To take in air, nourish our blood cells, our lungs, and release carbon dioxide. So, this, of course, is part of the larger system of our bodies, which is connected to the ecosystems of the trees and plants around us, right? Which create the oxygen that we breathe. And all of us are part of this interdependent planetary system, right? That is our climate. The ultimate metaphor for culture, right? Is kind of how I think about it from an organizational sense. We also have these relational systems all around us, our friends, our families, our teams, our communities, and absolutely our companies and our agencies. So what do all of these have in common? Every single system that you have listed here has in common that they are complex systems. Not simple like the faucet we can turn off, not even complicated like the puzzle that we can solve or the machine that we can fix, right? They're complex systems, which means that the performance of this system emerges not only from the individual parts doing their assigned jobs, but performance and effectiveness of a system emerges from the relationships between these parts and how those relationships shift over time. So complex systems have a few qualities I'll offer up to you and see kind of what starts to land and connect for you here. This becomes important as we move into how to work with these systems. So first and foremost, complex systems are self-organizing, right? Like this school of fish. Nobody has drawn this school of fish a map for where to go or how to swim, right? We're talking about collective intelligence that is just inherent in a system. The system is going to do what the system is going to do. So when we are working with a healthy system, we're not trying to limit self-organization by imposing a mandate or an order. That is always going to backfire. You're always going to have backlash to that from the system itself. We want to try to support the system with structures that allow it to move in the direction of its goals. That brings us to the second quality of complex systems, that they're hierarchical or hierarchical. I actually don't even know which way to pronounce it, but y'all can tell me in the chat. Hierarchical. But contrary to how many of us think about hierarchy, this is not necessarily about control. We're not talking about chain of command, command, control, do what I said because I'm your boss. Okay. Every system, human, natural, etc., has an order. And the top of the hierarchy, the reason for being of the top or the center command of a hierarchy is to define the purpose of the system. Here's where we're going and why. Here's what we're all coming together to do together. I call this the purposeful vision of a team or an organization, right? And then the top is intended to coordinate or facilitate the rest of the system to achieve that vision. So not to force through change and not to tell everybody how to do it in a micromanagey way, but to say, here's why we're all gathered, and then to be the facilitator, the coordinator. But the rest of the system is where the functionality lives, the actual doing of the thing that achieves that purpose. So we like to say purpose flows down in a system and function flows up. And that is the kind of healthy flow in a complex system. So hierarchy is not about power over, it's really about power with, right? And respecting the structure that we're looking to create in a system. Finally, the third quality of systems I want to point out is that complex systems are resilient. Systems are going to attempt to maintain stability however they can, right? Resilience, we'll define it as not only, take a hit and keep on going, but resilience in systems terms means to take in new information that allows us to adapt, just like this brave tree did, right? To adapt around this rock. Thank you, Wendy, for answering that question in the chat. Yeah, purpose flows down and function flows up. So those are the relationships across the hierarchy. So here we have our complex systems being resilient, adapting to change. And I want to bring in one other quote from another systems thinking master, Donella Meadows. If you're into this and you're feeling like, ooh, I want to go deeper on this, Donella Meadows' book, Thinking in Systems, is just fantastic. It's a great primer for this notion of systems thinking. And she says, an important function of almost every system is to ensure its own perpetuation. So this is a beautiful thing because it means, like that tree, systems can be resilient, right? They will come back, they will keep going. It also means, in terms of change, we've got our work cut out for us, right? Because systems are going to do what they know how to do. They're going to continue to perpetuate what has made them successful in the past. And so if you're in the line of work that I'm in, or that many of you are in terms of trying to change systems or bring systems along, then we have to get really strategic, systematic even, in how we are working with the system that we want to change. The first one there was self-organizing, Diana. And there was another question in the chat about, are there other types of systems besides complex systems? Absolutely, Courtney. I'm going to pop you back here. We can consider all of these to be different types of systems, just like they're different types of problems. A clear system like the sink is a clear system. Turn on the tap, water flows. Turn off the tap, water stops, right? I'm focusing mostly on complex because, as you all identified for us, most of the problems we are facing, because most of our problems are in relationship to other people, tend to be of this complex variety. Okay, so since we recognize that complex systems provide us opportunity and also challenge when it comes to leadership, we're going to talk about why we as leaders want to practice systems thinking. Systems thinking. Here's our next poll for you all. I'm interested to know what, if any, experience you have with systems thinking. Never heard of it, not very familiar. Maybe I know a little bit about it. Maybe some of you have trained in systems thinking. Maybe some of you use it all the time. Let's see what comes in from people. I'll tell you, like I said before, my experience with systems thinking for a long time was just thinking about mechanical systems, right? The kind of networked systems in more of a technological standpoint. But when I started to think about the fact that we are all systems together, and organizationally we're systems, and societally we're working in terms of systems, it really was an amazing eye opener for me. And that being said, I think it's also one of the leadership skills that I think is most unsung, if you will. Like, I don't think we're training people on this, right? In most of our leadership development work, I don't think we're teaching people how to think in systems. So I'm making a real argument today that from a team development, from a professional development standpoint, we can use more access to systems thinking. So, John, let's see where people are in terms of their experiences and see if that backs up. Okay, cool. So 5% of folks here have trained in systems thinking, 7% are using it all the time. So the 12% of you, I'm going to want to hear lots from you in the chat in terms of your expertise and experience. Please bring all of that wisdom. 38% of you know a little bit about it, 28% not very familiar, and 22% are here for the first time. Like, what is this thing? So let's dig into it. Oh, Jessica's taking a class next week. Okay, Jessica, let's stay in touch because I'm going to want to know what you learn. Okay, I want to offer you a preview, an intro to systems thinking as a holistic approach to doing what we said we'd do at the top of the hour, living with complexity and leading lasting change. All right, this is a simple way to think about what systems thinking is. And I'm going to also offer you a really powerful but very simple tool for applying it in your own ecosystem, wherever you happen to be. So systems thinking is interested in doing a few things. Systems thinking is interested in expanding our awareness to see the relationships between the parts that make up a whole. So whereas analytical thinking, some of us said, we kind of like to break things down into the component parts and make them make sense. That we can describe that as analytical thinking. Analytical thinking tries to break messes down into those parts and work with those parts. Creative thinking is interested in generating novel ideas for the future, right? Systems thinking is taking this approach of looking for the interconnections between these elements. It's kind of like the difference between seeing a team as a collection of individuals who might be star players or they might be problem people, and we kind of tend to see a team in those terms. And instead, from a systems thinking perspective, we're looking at the team as a whole. How do they connect with one another? How do they relate to one another? How do they collaborate with one another? And systems thinkers see that that is where the work is to be done. Rather than focusing on individual people as problems, we are focusing on the relationships, the interconnections between them. Systems thinking is also not just interested in one-off instances of success or failure. We are looking for patterns of how the system, with all of those various connections and elements, behaves over time. So we're looking at connections and we're looking at how those connections tend to behave over time in patterns. And then finally, the confluence of these allows us to start to identify some root causes. Remember, in a complex problem or a complex system, we're not thinking in linear terms of, oh, well, clearly this is the thing that is, creating this issue that we have. There's a lot of different factors that are at play here. And so systems thinking allows us to start to get a sense for what those root causes might be, as well as hidden areas of potential and performance in the system, what I like to call bright spots, right? As we start to get curious about what's going on in the system, we might find, oh, there's actually quite a lot that's working well here. And with that awareness of what's causing these behaviors, we can start to consider, how do we want to intervene in how the system is working, right? In order to change it or help it evolve. We call these opportunities for intervention leverage points. So for example, we could talk about instituting a feedback loop, like a reward for new positive behavior or a penalty for old negative or adverse behavior that increases the resilience of our system because we're getting information flowing in a new way, right? That's an example of a leverage point. More to come on that a little bit later on. So this is systems thinking in a nutshell. It really requires us to look at the bigger picture and to challenge some of our assumptions about why things happen and what is going to make change in the system really, right? But how we do this in the flow of work and perhaps even in times of crisis, right? That is really where our cultures are cultivated. And I just want to show this one last build here to illustrate for us that systems thinking operates at every level, right? Global societal systems, we can bring systems thinking to those dynamics. We can bring systems thinking to this middle meso level of teams and organizations and our agencies and how they're working. We can also bring systems thinking into our relationships and even our own personal ways of thinking and being in the world, right? So, particularly in government, but also in the private sector, you're part of multiple overlapping systems, right? Your immediate team, your agency, the broader government, ultimately the democratic system that includes the citizens and elected officials and courts and other stakeholders, right? So each level has different purposes, but everybody's working together to serve the public interest. So whatever scale we're applying our systems thinking to, the responsibility actually starts with us to practice this systems thinking. It is a practice for each and every one of us. So I want to do, before we get into this tool that I want to share with you that you can apply in the flow of your work, I want to just do a brief experiential uh, exercise for us, right? And I call it systems drinking. So hopefully everybody has access to a beverage. Hopefully you're hydrating out there. It's water, coffee, tea, whatever you happen to have. If you need to get up and go get something to drink, by all means, feel free. Or if you just want to reflect on something that you had to drink earlier today, that's also fine. But I just want to invite you to take a moment and consider. I've got a glass of water here. It's cold water, just from my tap. I've squeezed some lemon into it to be fancy. And so I'm going to sit here and consider this drink before I even take a sip of it. I'm just going to pause and reflect on where this water came from. So I invite you to do the same with whatever your drink is. If you're drinking coffee, maybe you're reflecting on the origin of the beans. Tea drinkers, my fellow tea drinkers out there, right? Where did the tea leaves grow that made the tea that you're drinking now? Or if you're with me and drinking water, where did the water come from? Well, if we're thinking in terms of natural systems, water comes from the sky, the clouds, falling into rivers or reservoirs, right? So the natural system of climate, of weather, right? Circulating water through all of the different phases of vapor, condensation, evaporation. And then there are man-made systems that channeled this water to me, right? Purified it and brought it to me through pipes into my home. And I might pause for a moment and think too about the human systems of people who built those conduits, who brought me this safe, clean drinking water. All of the people whose names I will never know. These are people I will never meet. Thousands, if not millions of people have contributed to me holding this glass of water in my hands, to you holding the cup of coffee, cup of tea. So just taking a moment, whatever your beverage of choice, it gets really fun if you do this around happy hour with a glass of wine or something, right? Thinking about who planted those grapes, by the way. Taking a moment just to notice, even in the most mundane of our daily activities, drinking a glass of water, we can have this sense of interconnectedness, of interdependence about how all of these systems are supporting us. It's really profound. It's a profound way to see the world. So if you do have a drink with you now, I'm just going to invite you with that frame to take a sip, a mindful, slow sip, appreciating all of the systems, all of the factors, all the forces that brought this drink into your hands right now. Mm. Water has never tasted so good. Oh, Monica, I love this note. This would be a nice mealtime ritual. Yeah, especially with friends, family, kids. Absolutely. This is it's an important part of what we call mindful eating and drinking, right? Is to, before we engage with whatever we're consuming, just to pause and consider where it comes from, and maybe offer a moment of gratitude to everybody who has been involved and all the forces that have been involved in bringing it to us. Any other reflections in the chat before we get into some kind of practical, concrete stuff? Yeah, it's a lovely little practice. While you pipe into the chat, oh, John's done this at Thanksgiving dinner. That's a beautiful moment for a practice like this. Yeah, lovely. I want to offer you one other quote, kind of following on the mindfulness tip. This comes from, I believe it's from Rumi, actually, the Sufi poet, who said, "You think that because you understand one, that you must therefore understand two, because one and one makes two. But you must also understand and." I love that because it's like the essence of systems thinking is that relationality, right? The connectedness that we have to one another. Okay, following on this, when we start to think in systems, you will realize how connected everything is. And a side effect of this is that we start to understand how out of control we actually are, right? Oh my gosh, this is not a simple problem. This is not even a complicated problem. This is a complex system that is at work, right? And especially in government, you might feel like you have less direct control than you might like to, or that you might have in other areas like the private sector. You know, you have to operate within laws and policies and political contexts that were not necessarily of your choosing. But when we're able to think in terms of systems, we can find those powerful leverage points to create meaningful change. Sometimes it's even the constraints themselves that provide opportunities. So you might not control the budget process, right? Or the latest executive order, but you still have more power than you realize. And it's when we let go of the need to control that systems thinking does offer us more power, more agency to be really effective in leading change. So just because we aren't in control doesn't mean we can't change the system. Doesn't mean we can't change it from right here where we are. So it's the recognition that we can't control a complex system that gives us the power to influence it. We just have to be systematic about it. So that brings us to a simple map you can use to dive beneath the surface of your system and start to work with it in a focused, systematic way. All right, I'm going to stay with my coral reef metaphor here for a minute. So the work of systems thinking really does begin and end with results, right? The results you're getting today versus the results you're pursuing. So wins, losses, change, resistance to change, backlash, growth, stagnation, decline, anything that we're seeing in the results category is the output of a system. And too many change initiatives will stop here, right? They'll just look, okay, well, we're getting this result and we want this result. So let's just make sure that we're telling people what we want to get. And that's a very linear way of thinking of getting from point A to point B. So, and it's understandable. I mean, results are what we can see, they're what we can measure, right? So we're going to spend most of our time and attention there. But why doesn't it work? Well, we're working with a complex ecosystem. It's not like it's a computer. We can just give it a new command and get a new result. A little curiosity reveals that results are produced by those behavioral patterns that are either unconsciously programmed or intentionally practiced in your system. So teams competing instead of collaborating, leaders not delegating effectively, conflict being avoided. These are all examples of patterns. And those patterns are supported a layer down by structures, operational structures like org charts and hierarchy, but also relational structures like roles and how those roles interact with one another. Rules and incentives are other types of structures that we can consider, and those influence the patterns that produce these results. But all the way at the base of the system, at the core of the system, there's one layer deeper, and that is the paradigm level. These are our assumptions, our mindsets, our beliefs that are quietly perpetuating this particular system's cycle. So this is where we really, if we want to profoundly create change, this is where we do it. This is where transformation happens, where even simple shifts in one core paradigm, one belief about how things have to be done can change everything. And we're going to see an example of this in just a moment after we do some work with this on our own. So when you shift a paradigm, then you'll naturally redesign your structures accordingly, and you'll see new patterns of behavior in your system. You'll see new results coming to the surface as just a natural outcome. And those results will reinforce the new paradigm. So it really is a cycle, a virtuous cycle, or it's a vicious cycle, depending on how intentional we're being about our paradigms, right? And about cultivating the system. So some self-reflection for you all. I want to invite you to bring to mind a current challenge or negative result. The person who was talking earlier about that, the acknowledging a mistake that you made, right? And the response that you got. That might be an interesting example of, oh, that's not the result that I wanted, right? And maybe that is something that we can use to kind of dig down into the system. So bringing a challenge that you're facing, a negative result that you've recently gotten, maybe a frustration that you have, maybe it's a report that nobody read, or a meeting that just went nowhere. You had high hopes and it just didn't achieve what you thought it was going to. Maybe it's a process that's creating more work than value, right? So instead of just chalking it up to, oh, well, it was just that one time, let's start to bring some curiosity. So typically when we're up at the level of results, we tend to react, right? Like I admitted I did at the very beginning. I tend to just react and trying to find the solution, right away. What's happening? Maybe a quick stop at whose fault is it? And then what's the fastest way I can fix it, right? It's very natural, very natural. So these results are always happening in your complex ecosystem, right? Budget overruns, public delays, et cetera, project delays, et cetera. So bringing to mind that event. And if we stay here at the level of event, we are only going to get to surface level solutions, right? Never to root causes. And that means we're going to spend an awful lot of our time fighting those same fires over and over and over again. A lot of the leaders that I work with, whether I'm coaching a leader or working with a leadership team, they're in this kind of firefighting cycle, right? Rather than going deeper to develop a resilient, adaptive, high-performing system. So let's go a layer deeper. This result that you don't want. A little bit of curiosity can take us into, ooh, has this happened before? Are we seeing a pattern here? Is there something else that's actually behavior over time, right? And what kinds of behaviors are producing this result? What is the nature of how people are showing up that's producing this result? What are the conditions? What are the catalysts that are involved here in this pattern? So suddenly we have much more information about this result and what is producing it. We might be better able to anticipate the next time, right? And if it's a good result, we're like, oh, it worked that time, right? We can also get systematic about that, right? Where did it come from? What produced it? How can we incentivize and reward that? So what are the patterns that you are seeing in your system right now? What are the patterns that you are seeing that are producing the results like the one you brought to mind? Maybe siloed information. People aren't sharing information with each other. Maybe there's, as I mentioned before, a reluctance to collaborate, right? I'm seeing Andrea in the chat, there's a lack of responsiveness from clients. Yeah, so that's a pattern. Patterns that we can continue to dig into. Let's go one layer deeper. After we've analyzed the patterns of behavior that we see, we can dig down into the design of our structures. Quick shout out to Melissa, who's in the chat, bringing up the lack of collaboration. Even though we're on the same team, we're working toward the same mission, why are we still competing with one another? Why are we not working together? Right? Okay, maybe our structures can tell us a little bit about that. So what is perpetuating this pattern? This may be, again, the structure of a team's hierarchy, the way that roles are defined, by the way. It could be how incentives are structured and how those behaviors are being rewarded. Are you rewarded for winning together, or are you rewarded for individual performance? A structure could also be communication channels. right? Is information getting withheld or stuck somewhere? Legislative mandates, funding mechanisms, reporting relationships, all of these are structures. And it's important to recognize that some structures are informal, meaning you haven't really officially designed them. They've just evolved into unspoken rules and norms of survival, right, in your system. So just because they aren't written down doesn't mean that they aren't a structure that exists and that you need to pay attention to. Yeah. All right. And there's one more level to the system. What built these structures after all, right? What designed the structures? The paradigms. So what is the belief or the assumption that created the structures that's begetting these patterns and producing these results? Assumptions, beliefs, even values, right, have informed those incentives or org charts or, KPIs. So examples of paradigms you might find working under the surface of your system. Asking for help is a sign of weakness, right? Is that a paradigm that is at play in your team or in your organization? How about this one? Being busy is how you show your value. That is a paradigm. I would love to see some thumbs in the chat if that feels like it's one that is resonant for you all. Taking on more projects is more profitable than doing quality work on fewer initiatives, right? So the kind of more is better paradigms. What paradigms might be powering your system right now and leading to some of this? What are these old beliefs that might go unexamined? We might not talk in these terms, but if we really get curious about what is that assumption that has kept us stuck in this cycle, we might find things like, well, public servants should do more with less, right? Government should be run like a business. These are all paradigms.
Yeah, and we got one in the chat saying that employees who work really fast often are rewarded, even though they might not actually get more done. Because they end up taking more breaks. So they work real fast, take breaks, but just because they work fast, they get the recognition.
Yeah. Yeah. So a paradigm might be for Danny, faster is better. And then the structure is that you're rewarding people for speed, but not necessarily quality or outcomes, right? In terms of the ultimate impact that their work has. So this is about taking a look at how do we shift that paradigm? It might just be starting with having a conversation about, I'm noticing this pattern. And I think that our incentives are, in need of some redesign. Yeah, great work, everybody. I'm seeing beautiful, beautiful thoughts in the chat. I want to keep us going just to hit a few more pieces before we wrap. So I'm going to ask my friend John just to keep an eye on questions that come through, and we can come back to them in a minute. But I want to make sure that I'm able to talk to you about those leverage points that I mentioned. Because even if you can't redesign the whole system tomorrow, identifying these layers gives you places to start. They give you a way to understand and start to dance with your system. Remember, not solve the problem because you're managing messes, right? Yeah, I like to talk about dancing. And in fact, Danella Meadows talks about dancing with the system, getting the beat of the system, being in relationship with the system, understanding it more and more, leading with curiosity. And each of these levels gives us an array of leverage points and opportunities where we can intervene to redesign the structure so the system works more successfully toward its purpose, right? Or to um, reorient a paradigm or reset a pattern. So I think we've got a poll here too. Let's go ahead and launch it. Where do you see potential to intervene in your system? So are you thinking, you know what, if we change the goal, if we're clear about how the result needs to shift, that will have a profound impact on what it is that we're after? Or maybe we need to establish some feedback loops that start shifting some patterns of behavior so people know when they're doing the right thing or the thing that's helping the system versus working against it. Do we need to be redesigning our structures? Is that where I feel like I could get involved and make a difference? And paradigms, right? Is it time to really dig deep and start challenging those old assumptions? What feels like where you could start to get involved? while we consider this, I'm actually going to move to the next slide, which offers you, and again, you're gonna get all of these slides in your materials. But this offers you kind of a way of thinking about, okay, which of these leverage points is going to be high impact and which might be a little bit lower impact, right? Okay, so most of you, ooh, look at that. We've got establishing feedback loops and paradigm shifts in the lead, followed closely by structures. Great. So folks, the further down you dig into your system, the more impact you will have. You will see that the highest impact intervention, the highest impact leverage point that we have here is to shift that paradigm. It also requires a fair amount of investment of our time and energy, right? It's going to take time. It's going to take real work and real conversations, real relationship work to shift the paradigm that's fueling the system. But it's worth it if we're after transformation. Changing the goal, and changing the goal here can be more than just adjusting the numbers. You see how those are in two different places? A lot of the time when we're talking about goals, we're just talking about, oh, well, raise the target and then people will have to meet it. And that never works. Lower the budget and then they'll have to get it done with less. Well, that never works either. But changing the goal is, okay, you know what? We used to be focused on speed and now we're going to focus on quality. That's an example of changing the goal in a way that can have a really profound ripple effect. Increasing autonomy in a system, sharing information, changing the rules and norms accordingly, all super powerful ways that we can intervene in the system. And we can do this in a trial and a test and learn way, right? Like, oh, let's try this new feedback loop and see what happens. Do people get clearer about what we're expecting, right? Some of our structural interventions are down there in the lower half of lower impact but high investment. So changing structures, increasing buffers, like increasing or expanding timelines or reducing delays. Um, they that's kind of structure without some of the behavioral and paradigm shifts that are useful to have. So again, thinking about the system as a whole. Thinking about the system as a whole. I want to offer you a case study before we wrap up and head to the chat for some of your reflections and questions. I think this is a really nice example of systems thinking in action. So after Hurricane Katrina in 2005, FEMA faced widespread criticism for its response. Many of us will remember. Through some really deep systemic analysis over the years that followed, they realized that their approach was too centralized and failed to leverage community resources and knowledge and partnership. And so this led to the development of the whole community approach to emergency management, which recognizes that federal government alone cannot manage disasters effectively. It created structures for coordination between the federal, state, local governments, as well as NGOs, private sector, and communities. And it shifted the paradigm. If we're talking about paradigm shifts, it shifted the paradigm from government as primary responder to government as convener and coordinator of multiple systems. You see how the hierarchy kind of got rebalanced there. It wasn't about top down, we're going to save you. It's about, okay, we're here to coordinate, connect the dots, and make sure that all the functions are working together. So this approach, this whole community approach, was formally adopted in 2011 and has been credited with improved responses to later disasters like Hurricane Sandy. Just a lovely example of how when we step back to really think about how we can create change in our systems, it is possible, and it doesn't have to take a really long time. So as our time comes to a close, I want to encourage you to add systems thinking to your strategic thinking toolkit. Some simple ways that you can start doing that today. Get curious. Curiosity is a systems thinker's greatest asset, right? A willingness to not know. So instead of just blaming budget constraints, ask what are assumptions that we have about our resources that might be limiting our ability to show up creatively with some innovation. Look for those connections. That's number 2. Resist the urge to just break things down into parts or to oversimplify a complex problem, right? Honor the complexity that exists in your relationship and know that the solutions are going to be in those connections, in the relationships, right? How might housing policy changes affect education outcomes or public health metrics? How are all of these things connected? Let's get curious and let's see those connections for what they are. This is so important. Include multiple perspectives. It is not possible to see a system by yourself. That's as true for a marriage as it is for a team, as it is for an organization, as it is for a society. But when we're all looking at our system together and we can talk about it together, we'll be able to see more of it and work more effectively to bring change, right? So commit to the good of the whole means being careful not to prioritize one part over the other, which is a natural human tendency we have, especially when we're part of one of those parts, right? And we also don't want to sacrifice the long term for the short term. So we want to stay focused on what is going to help the overall system be healthy and high performing as we move forward in time to pursue our purpose. So balancing agency-specific goals with broader coalition outcomes is really key. And finally, kind of coming full circle to get curious is stay humble, friends. Stay humble, because systems thinking will tell you you're wrong a lot more than it tells you you're right. Trust me on this, okay? Even well-intended policies will have unintended consequences. So we can be holding really lightly to our assumptions, right? Our beliefs about how things have to be, our models, including this one. Hold this lightly, right? Find out as you dance with your system what you can learn and check yourself constantly. Am I reacting to an event right now? Or am I getting curious about root causes? Am I aligned to our vision and looking toward long-term outcomes, or am I focused on the emergencies of the day? Am I including diverse perspectives and informing all stakeholders to keep that information flow going? And am I open to adapting, even if it is uncomfortable? And it's going to be, but we're in it together. Okay. I'm going to put up the thank you for your leadership slide. I feel like that's probably a good place to pause. John, I know we've got a couple slides for wrapping up too. Maybe I'll do this actually. I'm going to pop this up just so that folks, if you want to keep this conversation going with me, this is my website. It's just my name, KristenLasanti.com. Come learn more about the work I'm doing with Radiant Change. You can also connect with me on LinkedIn. Please connect with me on LinkedIn at Kristen Lasanti. Yeah, we'd just love to keep this conversation going and to continue to be systems thinkers together.
Okay, great. Well, yeah, we are pretty much out of time. Kristen, thank you so much. That was obviously everyone was engaged with this, enjoying this, and a very timely topic. So thank you so much for all these insights and for, kind of helping us think about how we're going to get through all this. But I also want to thank our 2025 NextGen Partner Alliance, for helping us put on today's NextGen Summit. We could not do it without them. And also, I want to just offer a few quick reminders before we log off. Don't forget to fill out your CP evaluation form. You can find that here under the resources tab or in the main exhibit. You can get there at the resource center. And also, please be sure to check out the amazing booths in the exhibit hall. Good time to do that before going to the next session. You'll find lots of additional information and resources there. And so, yeah, so our lunch keynotes are happening at 12:30 Eastern time, and you can access those sessions in the sessions tab in the main environment. So thank you all for being here, and we'll see you in the next session.
Thank you, everyone. Take good care.